Excellent.
Yeah, which is good.
We're easing into it.
Just to make it all
Well,
confusing.
after we do the minutes, which I have no changes to.
Okay, it is 6:30. It is 6:30, so we'll call the Planning Commission meeting of June 18th to order. And we do have a quorum here for the meeting, and our first item of business is approval of the minutes from the June 4th, 2019 meeting. Do we have any comments, questions, or a motion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Motion has been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are going to change the order of the items that are listed on the agenda, and we are going to take item 2 and make it number 1. So our first case will be the dog park, and the last case will be what is currently item 1. So we will start with case number LE 18-009, Copperleaf Dog Park, location and extent.
Good evening, Commissioners. Kat Hammer with Planning. The case before you tonight, Copperleaf Dog Park location and extent, has been publicly noticed in the Villager. It went in the May 30th edition, and mailing notice was sent to adjacent property owners. So the Planning Commission has jurisdiction to hear this case. The property is located northeast of the intersection of South Piccadilly and East Radcliffe. The adjacent zoning is single-family residence to the north and the east. The south is the property abuts like a drainage corridor and currently undeveloped. And the west, it is undeveloped, but the site is planned for a school. Norris Design is the applicant on behalf of Copperleaf Metropolitan District and South Quincy Residential Developers. They are proposing a public dog park. The property is 1.9 acres and is currently zoned mixed use within the Copperleaf Master Plan community, and it is proposed for a dog park that will be fenced and include a shade shelter, a water fountain, landscaping, and a separate area for smaller dogs. Staff recommends the application be approved based on the findings and subject to the conditions of the approval. I have suggested two conditions of approval. The first being prior to signature of the final copy of the plans, the applicant will address all Public Works and Development staff comments. And the second is the dog park will contain appropriate size signs that clearly identify the owners of the dog park, maintenance responsibilities of the dog park, and a point of contact for the dog park. I stand for any questions, and the applicant does have a presentation for you today. Okay.
I'm made for tall people. Good evening. Ryan McBreen, Norris Design, 1101 Bannock Street, Denver, Colorado, 80204. I just want to thank Kat for getting us to this point this evening. I just have a real brief presentation. I think it's pretty straightforward what we're asking here for today. I think everybody's familiar with where the project is. It's going to be adjacent to some future residential as well as the open space as part of Copperleaf. You see in the orange there. We're just asking to develop a dog park. This is something that the HOA community's been asking for a long time. Daniel Frank can attest to the clamoring that the residents are asking for. So here we are tonight to show you what we're doing. It's providing an amenity that's been requested by the community, and staff is in support. So here it is. It looks a little easier to read than it does on your plans right now. So the plan is for a large dog park area here. It's broken into two sections, one for kind of large, medium-sized dogs, and then also one for smaller pets. You have a shelter here, picnic area. There is a water fountain for both humans and dogs. And there is a landscape buffer between that and the open space area to the south. We've worked with ECCV through this process. They don't have any concerns or any issues like that. So there's not much more to it than that. It seems pretty straightforward, but we're here to answer any questions. I'm here, the owner and developers here, and our engineers here. Of note, in the packet resolution, it makes reference to Copperleaf Metro District number 1. It's actually going to be Copperleaf Metro District number 2 that's going to own and maintain it. So just to clarify that item and get it on the record there. So that's in the resolution packet in front of you. So That's all I have. Any questions, please let me know.
The maintenance of the dog park will be given to Metro District?
Yes, it's not going to be maintained by Arapahoe County, correct?
And where is the parking, or is it walking?
Sorry, let's let Dan out.
Good evening. Daniel Frank, 7400 East Orchard Road, number 290 South, Green Village, 80111. It'll actually be owned by the Metro District, but maintained by the HOA. We already have an IGA in place for the HOA to take on those maintenance responsibilities.
I'm just, are they going to have to raise their dues to take care of that?
There is no raise and dues plans now.
I have a question about, I don't think this has probably been ironed out yet, but I can tell you that there are people who don't use the supplies provided for them at the pest waste stations.
Right.
So obviously the Metro District is going to need to have somebody go out there on a fairly regular basis to clean up that area. Do you know what their proposal is in that regard?
So I've talked with her, and again, it'll be maintained by the HOA. And I've spoken with my manager, and she deals with the other dog parks. We realize that obviously people, even though it'll be clearly marked, to pick up after your pet, that's not always going to be the case. And so I think the plan is to have somebody come at least twice a week to pick up and empty the trash bins.
Great, thank you very much.
I did ask about the parking.
Sure. There's no specific parking. There is parking permitted. Whoops, wrong button. Sorry. Anyway, there's no parking lot dedicated to this. There is on-street parking provided adjacent, and then also it's connected via trails and sidewalks to the surrounding community. So ideally, people would walk their dog to the dog park.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So how are you separating the areas for small dogs versus medium and large?
There is a fence, so right there you kind of can see it on the plan. There's a fence there, and then there's a fence obviously all the way around to keep everything. So.
Thank you.
So is there any lighting?
No, there's no lighting.
And the homeowners that are across the street?
Well, there are no homeowners yet. There's no homeowners yet, so ideally, this dog park will be in place before they buy their house there, so it's something they're aware that is there when they purchase their home. So we're not adding this to them.
So those are not built yet?
No. In fact, Radcliffe, the street right here, is not constructed yet, so it's going to be constructed soon. So.
Will the street be done in conjunction with the dog park?
It's probably in conjunction with the development to the north.
Yeah, so, and, Ryan kind of alluded to it earlier that the dog park's one of our most asked about amenities by the residents, and the reason why we haven't brought it forward until this time is because that street wasn't finished. With all the recent development going on in that area, Radcliffe is going to be completed here pretty shortly, so that's why we're bringing the case forward now.
Thank you. Any other questions? No?
All right, thank you.
So we will open public hearing if there are no questions from the Planning Commission at this point. If anybody wishes to come forward and speak to the proposed dog park. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Are there any other questions from the Commission? If not, we will move forward. Mrs. Lamb, Chair.
I'd like to make a motion. In the case of LE 18-009, Copperleaf Dog Park location extent, I have reviewed the staff report, including all exhibits and attachments, and have listened to the applicant's presentation, and any public comment is presented at the hearing, and hereby move to approve this application based on the findings in the staff report, subject to the following conditions 1 and 2.
Do we have the second for Mrs. Lax's motion?
Oh, second.
Very good. Mr. Saul has seconded the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Our second item will be the Case number FDP 19-001, Copperleaf number 22 FDP. And Mr. Skinner will present for the county.
Okay. Evening, Planning Commissioners. Bill Skinner for the Planning Division. FDP 19-001, Copperleaf, filing number 22, Final Development Plan. You're already familiar with the neighborhood. This is just a little bit north and west of the location you just heard about. To establish jurisdiction first, the applicant posted the property for more than 15 days with a sign, mailed letters to adjacent properties using the addresses specified by staff. This being Planning Commission hearing for this FDP moves on to the board, so we don't have a newspaper posting for this. But we've established jurisdiction for the Planning Commission tonight. So this is in Copperleaf. Specifically, this is immediately southwest of the intersection of East Quincy Avenue and South Malta Street. The FDP, I know Ryan's got a presentation for you that'll show elevations and housing types, so I'm not going to get too deeply into that myself. But it's in Copperleaf, part of the Copperleaf PDP, which allows up to 267 homes on this site at a maximum density of 12.6 DU per acre. This application came in at 8 DU per acre, and instead of 267, we're looking at 146. Some of those are I would call it contemporary or traditional styled home like you see throughout Copperleaf right now. And they've got a little different product coming to this project too, which are a 3-story modern style home, which staff opinions on it are varied depending on who you are, but the staff acknowledges that one of the things we're hearing a lot about is compact development, the need for more housing on the Front Range, and people needing to be open-minded about what is possible to make better use of the land. Now, better is a subjective term, but we would like to note that they're getting a fair amount of housing on fairly small lots, and they're doing it close to services. There's commercial development across Quincy on the north side, and there's a little more coming into Copperleaf all the time with I think up to 10 commercial pads that have been approved east of here on the south side of Quincy. Already went over the PDP. The staff comments are being addressed. External agencies had very little to say about it. We had one citizen comment who got a hold of me actually even before this went out on notice, and it's Sarah Watson, and she says she doesn't want 3-story homes to be approved. In the communications back and forth in the emails, she says there aren't 3-story homes yet in that area, and she fears this might set a precedent. Staff notes that we already have an approval on the books, something that was approved through the board for a multifamily on this property. Obviously, it's never been constructed, but the maximum height on that was 50 feet. This development is coming in with nothing that exceeds, it's 45 feet, but I believe it's actually everything's under 44 feet tall. So just for the record, that's already out there. We aren't pushing any boundary that we haven't already approved in another way, shape, or form. Staff recommendation for this is for approval. Planning Commission is in the role of making a recommendation tonight, and then the staff will take this forward to the board for a determination. Do you have any questions for me, or would we move straight to the applicant?
I guess I'd like to address the comments about the sidewalk. Has that been committed to finish the recommended sections?
Yes, we're working through the sidewalk. Details are still being resolved, but yeah, I've talked to the applicant's team tonight, the applicant's engineer, and they say they're working on it. We're kind of putting it on the books tonight, so neither they nor I have any choice in the matter going forward. We'll have to do it.
Any other questions?
Okay, with that, yes, I believe so. Ryan? You're up again. Hello, it's me again. Ryan McBreen, Norris Design, 1101 Bannock Street, Denver, Colorado, 80204. I think Bill succinctly kind of spoke about everything, but I'll touch on a few details and show some pretty pictures so you can kind of get a better idea of what we're doing here today. You're all familiar with where it is. There's approximately 76 of the units are alley loaded, 68 are front loaded. I'll show you those locations. And as Bill pointed out, the uses we're proposing, the density we're proposing, the height we're proposing, the setbacks, the parking, everything is within conformance of the approved Copperleaf PDP. So here's the site plan, as we talked about earlier. These white gray buildings, these are what we're calling the Cityscapes product. These are the smaller lot product here. They're served by an alley. These yellow homes are your more traditional front load garage, single-family detached homes here. Access will be taken off Radcliffe, as well as Malta Street here on the east side. And to answer your question, we are going to meet the conditions of approval as presented by staff. In fact, right here you'll see we show that as part of this development, they're going to finish this connection along Quincy Avenue with landscaping all the way out to Himalaya, kind of fill the hole in the gap there because this is not going to be developed. So moving forward, these are elevations for the front load product that are in your packet right now. It's very similar to what's been built in other portions of Copperleaf. Probably more interested in the Cityscape product. So this is the product in front of you. This isn't the exact elevations that are presented in front of you, but these are very similar. You can see what it looks like. It's a 3-story served product, alley loaded served product there. It's been wildly popular wherever they developed it. Hilton Commons is a place obviously that's not in the county, but that's one within the county that has been wildly successful here. So what it does is it allows smaller lots, more attainable price points in this area, and just provides a different housing type in Copperleaf community. So pretty excited to bring this here. They've seen lots of success and lots of people. They thought it would trend towards younger people, but it's also trend to empty nesters and those sorts. So it's been, like I said, it's been a pretty popular product, so they're excited to bring it here. I'm not going to read through all of these, but as staff notes in the staff reports, in conformance of Section 13-100 PUD of the LDC. So we don't think there's any issues that this development brings to the table that we see. Like I said, we agree to meet all the conditions of approval as presented by staff within the staff report, and staff does recommend approval. That concludes my presentation. Once again, I'm here representing as a land planner and as the landscape architect, drafting the entitlements. We have the civil engineer, we have the landowner, and we also have Richmond Homes here today, the home builder. So we're here to answer any questions that you might have.
On the Cityscape product,
yes,
each unit is individually owned?
Yes.
So the exterior is taken care of by the homeowner?
Correct.
And what about the landscaping in the front?
The landscaping in the front is within you own that land, but it's actually taken care of. It's a common landscape area on the front, so it's by the neighborhood.
All the area along Quincy would be taken care of.
Well, the area by Quincy is not on lots right there, so that's all part of the HOA. HOA will take care of that, right? Yeah, it's HOA maintained along Quincy Avenue here, and then they'll take care of these common areas in front of the homes here. Obviously, these individual lots, they'll be responsible for all the landscaping in their front and rear yards like a traditional front-loaded home.
And the streets then would be private?
Are these streets? Mm-hmm. No, the streets are public, but the alleys are private, which are these guys. The alleys are private. Streets, but the main streets are public and designed and will be built to Arapahoe County standards. This has been vetted and reviewed by the fire department, and Public Works.
Could you confirm the distance between Quincy and the site of those units?
I do not know off the top of my head. I'd have to look on the plans, but it meets all the required setbacks for the underlying PDP.
Any other questions?
So where is the open space?
So it's part of the greater open space network within Copperleaf. We have the trail network. We have open spaces in between fronts, common areas, and then connections to the greater open space surrounding it as well.
And can you show me where the commercial area is?
Commercial is would be over here.
Mm-hmm. So what is the height of the traditional style houses?
I believe it's in your packet, second one. It's in the low 30s. I want to say 30 to 35 feet. There.
Okay, so anyone who buys a house and then looks out over the 44-foot Richmond Cityscape design is going to have a view impact. Is that correct?
It should not, because the way the grade of this project goes, it falls down steeply to the kind of the drainage area here. So these are all the lower single-family homes, so they'll technically be below them, so their views will not be impacted by the.
Okay, but I'm looking at where those houses are going to be built, and the fronts of those houses look out over that project, right?
Sorry,
Okay, so on Quincy Place, is that it?
Yes,
is
right
that
here.
what I'm looking at?
Quincy Drive right here, or this one, Quincy?
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So the front of the houses just to the, I don't want to call it south because I don't know whether it's south.
Yes, this is south. These right here.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll look out over the narrow 46, 45, whatever foot height cityscape buildings. Is that correct?
Yes, they'll be fronting each other. Yes. There really aren't views to the north, and the idea is that all this project will be built simultaneously. So if someone purchases this house here, they know what they're getting across the street there, so it won't be a surprise.
Can you tell me what are the approximate lot sizes for the Cityscape versus the more traditional single family?
I want to say, and I'm going to defer to Tess on this. Hey, Tess, I'm sorry. Single-family lots are average 60 by 110s. Is that what these are? And then our Cityscape lots, I want to say, are 28 by 50s.
The Cityscapes are 31 by 55.
31 by 55.
Sorry. Tess Hogan, ILC, 12071 Tejon Street, Westminster, Colorado. And we're the civil consultant for the project.
But you show landscaping on the perimeter of the cityscape, but between the alleys and the small lots, there's no way to grow anything anywhere else, true?
Well, this would be a typical alley-loaded home. So these white boxes are the homes, and they back right up to the alleyway. So there's your driveway, and there's your house, that small apron in there. And then in front here, there's these green courts out here, so your front of your home opens up out into the green space area. It's a little small scale.
And if you own a big pickup truck, you can go down that alley and put it in the garage?
If you dare.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we actually have utilities in those corridors, so there is 30-foot clear and a designated easement, so there's more room than it looks like on this picture.
Yeah, and fire had no issues with it. Worked with them to make sure the alley widths were correct and their access was not impeded, so no issues. And so I would hope, once again, that if someone's going to buy this property and they have a big truck, that they would check that. So. Right.
Yeah. It's paired homes for KB homes to the east?
Yep, right here. Yep.
That's correct.
What is the density for that?
I would have to look that up, but I may have that. Give me a minute.
You mentioned. So.
Is there on-street parking on Quincy Drive?
Yes. So these are just standard local streets. So there's on-street parking along all of the streets. You can't park on the alleys, but there's 2-car garages associated with every unit as well. So parking in between each all along here. And obviously this is an unbroken stretch here.
Any other questions while we're waiting?
Yeah.
On density?
Yeah.
Also, over here, while they're They have a lot more single-family detached than we do as well because it's a bigger area. It goes all over here, so that's maybe equal to, or maybe not as.
Yeah, and the paired home height that KB is building, do you know what the height of that?
I want to say they're down in the 30-foot area.
Yeah, which is typical.
They're 2 stories with a peak. I believe the density in the paired home area to the east is between 11 and 12 GU per acre, and they were talking about doing 112 of those.
Yeah.
As I understand it, one of the appeals of the Cityscape to some of the people who have, 2 couples, well, 1 family and 1 couple who live in them now, they didn't mind the idea of a townhome, but they didn't like the idea of a common wall. Mm-hmm. So they felt like this got them both options.
Do you know, and I know it's obviously early to kind of estimate that, what is the projected starting price of the Cityscape versus the single family?
Sure. Low 400s. And what's single family? The other side? They're probably starting at the same right now. So, but obviously all the options and all that different lot sizes.
What's the square footage variation? Does anyone know? I mean, you're aware of what your competitors are doing, right? So.
Yeah, they're typical single-family sizes. I think they're range, I believe, 14 to 2,800 square feet is the range that we typically see on that, and so your single-family will be likely somewhere in that same ballpark.
Thank you.
And the architectural products used are equivalent between the larger detached lot homes versus the Cityscape?
Yes, it's a cohesive design, so it won't look completely out of place from each other. So, and as you're aware, Copperleaf has some pretty rigorous design standards overall, which we have to meet. So that's why what I showed you on the screen was from another project, but they were colored. So I want to show you colored ones just to give you an idea what they look like, but they're slightly different because they have to meet the Copperleaf standards, which are those elevations are shown in your plan set.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the Planning Commission before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, we will open the public hearing for anybody who wishes to comment on the planned Cityscape development in Copperleaf. Doesn't seem to be anybody who wishes to speak, so we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission for consideration, comments, or motions.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Watson.
I'm on a roll. In the case of FDP 19-001, Copperleaf number 22, final development plan, I have reviewed the staff report, including all exhibits and attachments, and have listened to the applicant's presentation and any public comment as presented at the hearing, and hereby move to recommend approval of this application based on the findings in the staff report, subject to the following conditions 1 through 4.
Do we have a second for the motion as presented by Mrs. Latsis?
I'll second.
Okay. Mr. Stahl has seconded the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm voting no. So we have it 4-1. Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is item the MS4 Permit Updates. Case number EE 19-044. And Sarah White will be presenting for the county.
Top one. That one.
Hello, Commissioners. Sarah White with Engineering Services Division, and Chuck Haskins is going to be my backup just in case. I'm here tonight to present the Stormwater Management Manual update based on the new MS4 permit. What's an MS4? Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Here, I'll be throwing that around a little bit tonight, so I figured I'd let you guys know what the definition is. An MS4 permit is in regards to something that's established by the Federal Clean Water Act. There's certain requirements that come along with it, including construction, post-construction, water quality control, and public education. How the county adopts this. Every 5 years, the Colorado Department of Health and Public Health and Environment issues an MS4 permit. We just had our most recent update in 2016, and a lot of the changes are going to be required as of July 1st this year. This is how we handle some of them in regards to the construction site runoff control. We have our GESC manual. In regards to the illicit discharge detection and elimination, we have our stormwater ordinance. I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about the change with the post-construction runoff control and our stormwater management manual, Chapter 14. Along with the MS4, there's also an overlying regulations within the Cherry Creek Reservoir and the basin that's above it. That's just a little map for where the basin is. So the changes to the 2016 MS4 permit are a couple, these 5 things in particular. The stormwater ordinance needs to be updated. Our stormwater management manual, Chapter 14, needs to be updated. Grading erosion settlement control manual needs to be updated. Enforcement response plan, and then we also updated our stormwater facilities maintenance agreement. Again, tonight I'm here to talk to you specifically about Chapter 14 of the Stormwater Management Manual. It was last revised in 2011, and Chapter 14 addresses our post-construction water control measures. With the new permit, we've updated some definitions that are within the requirements of the permit. We've clearly designated and differentiated the development within and outside of Cherry Creek Basin. And there's now some record-keeping requirements that we didn't have previously. Some additions also are in regards to the expansion of design standards that are now allowed within the MS4 permit. For instance, we're looking at more grain infrastructure and infiltration instead of just runoff and capture. The regional water quality that we have, and similar within the Dove Valley, where it's a regional water quality facility and then there's 20 control measures, are now throughout the entire Cherry Creek Basin, or excuse me, within the MS4 area of the Cherry Creek Basin. And there's some information in regards to restrict constrained development. So if you have an infill site, there's some other options for you versus just having to have a detention facility on there. There's some new exclusions. I won't get the whole list, but there are some exclusions to water quality requirements that are shown that are automatically given. And part of the requirements as well is a clear designation for within the Cherry Creek Basin and with outside the Cherry Creek Basin. We've developed this matrix, so this would be within the Cherry Creek Basin, and then a separate that is outside of the Cherry Creek Basin. Developed the definitions of new development, redevelopment, and an applicable development site. Those were lacking in our previous stormwater management manual, so those will now be included. We did do some public outreach. We went to the Home Builders Association in March. We did an open house at the Simswell offices, and then we'll be doing the Board of County Commissioners hearing next week. The posting has already happened, and all of our documents are posted on the website currently. Again, we'll be going to the Board of County Commissioners next week, and then we'll be looking at updating the entire Stormwater Management Manual by the end of the year. So we're here tonight because we are looking for a recommendation to send this over to the Board of County Commissioners. What questions do you have?
Any questions? Just glad to see you've got more than detention facilities.
Yes, exactly.
Good.
Yes, so there'll be 5 standard ones, and then you can also offer a variation to those standards as well. So that'll be nice. And infiltration is good too.
That's a nice photo.
Yeah, I like it. It's obviously dated.
Yeah, I like how that opens.
Yeah. We're not there anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know how old that is?
I don't, no. It was a last-minute addition.
I guess there are no questions, so thank you very much.
Okay, yep. Do I need to say anything else?
Okay. Our next item is.
We have to vote. We have to vote.
Vote on this.
Oh, we need
to
to
make a motion. I'm so sorry.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would like to make a motion. In the case of EE 19-044 Stormwater Management Manual, the Planning Commission finds ourselves in agreement with staff findings 1 through 3, including all attachments as set forth in the staff report dated June 12, 2019, and recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners with conditions or subparts 1 and 2 noted.
Okay, we have a motion. We have Mrs. Woolman made the motion. Do we have a second to the motion? Mr. Saul seconds the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. We will now move to item number 4, formerly item number 1, case number LDC 18-004, the Land Development Code Reorganization, Residential Zone Districts, and Development Application Manual. And Mr. Reynolds will make the presentation.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. First off, would like to note that this was published in the paper of record at least 15 days prior to this hearing, and we also published the proposed changes in the I-70 Scout because these do have effect countywide. Really excited to be here this evening. This is a project that started several years ago with a land development code assessment prepared by Clary & Associates that identified some shortcomings in the way our code was organized and how it was managed. And part of that assessment identified the things that were on fire and needed to be fixed immediately. And we did amend our PUD regulations as a result of that. And this evening is sort of the second phase of the topics identified by that assessment. And our hope tonight is to receive a positive recommendation from the Planning Commission to bring this code reorganization and development application manual and new residential zone districts forward to the Board of County Commissioners. I'd also like to thank Alan White with the Planning Division, who's just done exemplary work to help us get here tonight. The development application manual is the result of many, many hours of Alan's focus and talent, and the entire planning staff should also be credited for their efforts to bring this to you. They had a significant amount of input in the residential zone districts as well as the development application manual, because that is the thing that the planners are going to have to be using a lot in their daily work lives. And one thing I will emphasize is that this is in a large part a change that is about the form of the code more so than the substance of the code. While there are some substantive changes, which we outlined in the staff report, and of course the addition of the residential zone districts, this is literally reorganizing what was there before. And I think at this point I will introduce Don Elliott with Clearing Associates, who suffered a few flight delays today, but has managed to make it in time for this public hearing to talk a little bit about the reorganization and sort of the philosophy behind how the code is proposed to be organized.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I only made it because you rearranged the schedule to accommodate me, so I didn't make it, but you helped me make it. I appreciate that. I have now seen the Denver metro area from the air, from north, south, east, west, and then north, and then south, and then east, and then I actually waved as I went by, but nobody saw me. So thank you for being here. I am Don Elliott. I'm a director with Clarion Associates, and we are based in Denver, and this is what we do for a living. We consult with county and city governments all over the country on how to reorganize and how to update their development codes. So this is very much in the mainstream of what we do. We've worked with numerous organizations around the metro area, and then the last time we counted, we had done about 190 of these across the country. So different all the way from fixing the PUD procedures, which was the very first part of this project, to reorganizing or redrafting an entire ordinance. So I respect builders. I work with builders a lot because they know what's wrong. They know how to get things done. They know how the economy and the building market works. But our firm does not represent builders in entitlement work. We work for government when government says we really need this to be redone. And as Alan said, the bulk of this is reorganization, and I want to talk just a little bit about the logic behind it. So when we made our recommendations a couple of years ago, the county said, help us think through. There are a lot of, we know, staff knows, builders know, there are a lot of issues here. What are the things that you see as a national consulting firm, and what's the priority order for getting them done if you were to advise us? And here's kind of what we said. First of all, the priority was to get your PUD and PUD amendment procedures and criteria straightened out because that was creating, as Alan said, they were on fire. There were some real problems there. Then we moved on and said, surprisingly, we actually do recommend that the next step is to reorganize the code into a logical structure because it helps the public understand and builders understand and potential investors in Arapahoe County understand where to find things. More importantly, until you reorganize the code, if you were to say, for example, fix the parking standards, fix the landscaping standards, fix something else, we would be drafting it to fit into an outdated structure. And then on the day that you decided you wanted to make it user-friendly, you'd have to redraft it back into the new structure. And so we often advise clients to say, even though it sounds easy, it's not, but you will find the remaining keeping the thing up to date and updating whatever needs done next, whichever development standard or zone district or process needs to be done next, easier because it's going to fit into a structure where it's pretty clear where the amendments have to be made. And it's pretty clear sometimes when you have a new idea, a new development idea, or a new review process, having it organized logically helps you say, you know what? When we hold it up next to things that are like it, when we look at the chapter that deals with that, it's not so unlike what we already have for another context. Maybe we don't need a brand new chapter. Maybe we just need to modify something we're already doing. So part of this is just organizing it logically so that over time, it's very tempting. We have a new idea or a new initiative to just say, here's a new chapter, let's add it on. Here's a new district, let's add it on, etc. And this helps you say, no, let's add the parts of it that relate to different topics in the right place, and that'll help us understand how much amendments we need going down the road. So one of it was to consolidate zone district and information in one place and development procedures in a separate section so that substance is separated from procedure. Second was to take the application submittal requirements out. Alan's going to talk about that manual, but the bottom line is that allows you to be nimble because as technology changes and you decide that you don't need that format or you need a different set of technical data to make a good decision on something, you don't have to amend the LDR. You can just amend the manual, and that's a lot easier. Creating new residential zone districts, Alan's talked about, and then overhaul. So let's talk about this. There are 19 chapters in your current land development regulations. We have consolidated those into 7. Now, I've got a slide. The next slide, I'll show you all 7. But the major message here is most of the meat of how the zoning and subdivision process works, the zoning works, is in chapter 3, 4, and 5. 3 answers the question, what can I do with my property? Uses. Or, I want to do X. Which zone districts should I buy property in? Chapter 4 says, how do I lay this out? I know I can do a hotel because I looked in the uses. Now, how do I have to lay it out? How good does it have to be? How do I lay it out? It's not a question of use, but design. How much parking do I need? Are there circulation requirements? How much buffering and screening do I need? Do I need access provisions? What about lighting? Anything that has to do with how good does it have to be and how does it fit in with what's around it would be in Chapter 4. That's development standards. And finally, Chapter 5 answers the question, who is going to approve this and what criteria do they use? Do I go in front of the commission? Is this something staff can do? Is it the board that does this? And very importantly, what criteria will they use to make the decision? Our experience around the country is this is really helpful to citizens because they can ask the question. If it's parking, you know where to find it. You don't have to flip through zone after zone. You have one chapter called parking or lighting. If it's a question of uses, you'll see it in a table. So that is the fundamental part of it. You had a lot of obsolete zone districts going on to the next bullet, which we have taken out to make it easier to read. It still exists on the county attorney's desk. There's an archived version of this. If people come in and say, I'm in the X district, you can find what the rules are that go along with that if they're already zoned and they haven't been rezoned into a different district. But it is a little confusing to have a code say, you know what, we don't use any of these districts, but we're going to keep printing them. That is usually not what you do when you update a code. Finally, common procedures. We've tried to reorganize the procedures, how you do business, how staff does business, to say fewer times, to say once things that can be put in one section rather than reading them for each procedure. For example, how do you take in applications? How do you do notices? How do you determine whether an application is complete? Who do you refer to and how do you do referrals? How are public hearings conducted? We've reorganized the procedures to say some things happen regularly across many different types of procedures. Let's say them once. And that way you can, if somebody wants to amend it in the future, you can look at what you do normally and say, this really is different. But then after that, you get into rezonings or permits or variances, things like that. So common procedures is a way of consolidating a lot of similar information related in Chapter 5. So this is the 7 chapters, and as I've said, there's one is general provisions, boilerplate, talks about authority and how you handle transition from the old ordinance to the new one. 2 is just a menu of zone districts. I've explained 3, 4, and 5. 2 says what's the menu of place types in the county. Other than the residential districts, we have not created new ones, but we've carried them over. What can I do in each one? How good does it have to be? How do I get approval? Who can approve it? Then at 6 and 7 are simply how do we enforce this? How do we enforce our own laws? And finally, all of the definitions are put in Chapter 7. So that's the logic behind it. You know, I do this all over the country, and people sometimes say, Don, I've looked at several of the codes you've written. They all look somewhat similar. Some have 7 chapters, some have 9, some have 6, some have 5. And the answer is we often talk to people and say, there are 3 or 4 ways you could organize it. 90% of the time they choose some version of this because of the logic I mentioned here. So this is by far the most common, more or less, although your staff, we chose to take enforcement and violations out of procedures to make it clearer. So that is the logic behind it. I'll turn it back over to Alan, and then I'll have a couple more slides later on tables and charts. Thanks.
Right. Just button all from here. So there's popping up and down.
All right. Sorry. So, Jason.
Yes. Just to briefly talk about the public input process, in addition to the typical referral, which included over 80 homeowners associations and 60 review agencies, we did provide a draft of the residential zoning districts to the Home Builders Association of Metro Denver, as well as builders who had recently had projects here in Arapahoe County. And got the feedback from the Home Builders Association. We were able to address some of the concerns. However, some of the concerns, as noted in the staff report, would have to be addressed through a PUD process. We also presented these proposed residential zone districts at the 4 Square Mile neighborhood meeting in May. I did receive some feedback that there were concerns about the height limit in some of the zone districts. In some of the more dense zone districts, there's a height limit of 38 feet, and that was done deliberately to potentially accommodate townhomes that would like to have pitched roofs as opposed to flat roofs. And we even have examples in the 4 square mile of townhomes that were recently approved that had 42-foot height limit. I believe Avery on the Highline Canal is an example of that one. Some of the feedback that I received at that meeting, actually, we incorporated into the zoning districts, nudged some of the side yard setbacks based on feedback there to have them reduce more logically as the minimum lot sizes got smaller in the zone districts. So that's just a quick overview of the public outreach we did in association with this project. And, we did really appreciate the feedback we got during it and the dialogue with the Home Builders Association. And I did find confirmation that this did get on the HOA's radar. I checked a Centennial HOA organization website, and it was mentioned in the minutes of one of their meetings a couple months ago. So they definitely heard from us, though I did not receive any comments from them. So moving on to the next slide, and back to Don, would be the Chapter 3, the permitted uses section of the code.
There's your public input process. There's a slide talking about what Jason just... Oh, is that right? There you go.
That is.
All right, let's just talk briefly about how we summarized information. This is another example of how we tried not to change the substance, but we tried to organize it for user friendliness. So, this is a use table. All of the uses have been 7 parts of things that were in 7 different chapters are now in one table. It is hard to read on the screen, but I want to point out down the left-hand column of this table is every use categorized by type and subcategory that is listed in your current zoning ordinance. Across the top are different zone districts, and you can see the first tier of columns is agricultural and residential districts, the next one is non-residential districts, and then there are a column for PUD. So the middle of the table is really a column for every zone district, including PUDs. Over at the right-hand column is a set of cross-references. And this way of organizing uses basically says in every cell, it's either blank, meaning you can't do this, or it's a permitted use, meaning it can be approved if you meet the criteria, or a special review use, or a special exception use, SR, SE, T means temporary, A means accessory. And they're organized kind of logically. This is part of what I said earlier. If somebody comes up with a new thing, cottage homes, whatever it is, tiny homes, you can look in the right place of the table to say, is this like something? And as you enter it into the table, say, should we treat it like something else that we're more familiar with, or should it be deliberately different? This helps you not come up with kind of unexplainable inaccuracies or unexplainable inconsistencies in how you treat different types of uses in very similar districts. So, and then on the right-hand side, those are, as some people say, the large print giveth and the small print taketh away. Those criteria on the right are limits. If there are limits in here on hours of operation, how big can it be? For example, and I'm just making this up, there are places that say retail is a general category. We are consolidated into general retail. But in our smaller zone districts, we don't want them bigger than 5,000 or 10,000 square feet of floor area. In bigger ones, we don't mind if it's a big box. So that, instead of having separate lines that say retail under 5,000 square feet, retail 10,000, retail 15,000, you can say in the right-hand column, look, yes, you can do it in that zone district. Go read the right-hand column. It'll tell you whether there are special requirements that attach to that in certain circumstances. The next slide is of development standards, and I think this is the second slide. So the first slide I gave you was from Chapter 3, how do we organize uses. This table is from Chapter 5, and it basically talks about the different types of, this is dimensional standards. That's just Chapter 4, standards. This, like the last one, on the left-hand side, talks about all the different dimensions, lot size, setbacks, building heights. Across the middle of the column, it talks about different zone districts, and a grade cell means your current ordinance doesn't have a standard for that dimension in that zone district. Should you? Well, that's a question for the future. It helps highlight, gee, I didn't know we didn't have a standard for X in that zone district. But now this highlights the fact that, wow, we do have it in some, we don't have it in others, maybe just fine, but you can see what you do and don't have standards for. So this is a way of consolidating so you can, as Jason just suggested, if you're going to have different residential districts, to make sure that the setbacks, the lot coverages, are logically progressing as lot sizes or widths get smaller or larger. So again, this and it basically helps investors to say, if I wanted property where I could have a lot size of just this, what zone, where should I look at it? Which zone districts could that dimension apply in? So that's the table. We got lot size, setbacks, and then if you look at the last bullet, chapters 12, 15, and 18 of the code, means this chapter also has parking, landscaping, lighting, signs, and urban design, and small lot residential sign standards. Here is the table I introduced last, and this is the third of three. This is a procedures table. Down the left-hand side, it lists all the different types of applications a property owner could file with Arapahoe County. And the colored sets of columns above it are who decides. Green is staff, yellow, tan is Planning Commission, the orange is things that have to be decided by the Board of County Commissioners and BZA. This part of the table doesn't fill that in, but there is a part that does. So, again, I explained common procedures. Once you get past common procedure, it kind of organizes the left-hand column in two. What are the procedures related to zoning your property? What are the procedures related to site planning and site approval once you've already gotten zoning? What are the procedures about exceptions and flexibility? What are the procedures about platting land into new lots or replatting existing lots? And finally, miscellaneous. So this is only part of the table. Down, if that table continued, you'd see that in many types of applications, one or more body does not have a role. It is grayed out. In other ones, they do. And up at the top, it talks about are they a review body? Are they a decision-making body? And do you need to have a public hearing on that matter? So we have not changed these. Again, the PUD procedures were changed several years ago. But in this reorganization, this table consolidates what you're doing now. It does not change that. I suspect that if this moves forward and the Board of County Commissioners approves it, there'll be some people looking at it and saying, you know, I never realized that this was set up that way. I'd urge you to go ahead and move forward, even if you see when you look at it, I wish this were changed, because it's easier to explain to the public what Jason has just explained. This is a reorganization of material that you're already familiar with. We're not going to pick and choose substantive changes. That will come afterwards, because that way you can have a discussion with yourselves and the Board of County Commissioners over whether this is the right way to organize the information, whether it's helpful, if you find an inaccuracy, that's fine. I don't think there is when they've really sweated it. But it gets messy when you have to tell the public, we decided to change some things, but we can't explain to you why we changed these and we didn't change those. So at this stage, it's much easier to go and say, we're talking about the format and the organization, and then there are substantive, a few things that have come up along the way, but the less of that you can do and the more you can explain it, the smoother it goes. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jason. Thanks.
Thank you. And just one point on that last table. By consolidating all our procedures into a single table, if there was only one thing we could have done through this code amendment, it would be that. It really helped us think about how our procedures worked, and we did comb through a lot of the code to find just how many different places public hearings were discussed in different chapters of the code. And I hesitate to, say nightmare, but it's much, much better now. And I give credits at the beginning, but I also want to thank our Bob Hill with our county attorney's office for enduring a lot of discussions regarding that table and making sure that we have the newspaper notices in the correct place and all of the other types of notice assigned to the appropriate types of applications. So a supplement to this code is the Development Application Manual, which was referenced earlier, and much of this manual consists of items that are relocated from the Land Development Code. Because as I mentioned, with public notice requirements, those were scattered throughout the code in many different sections. So too were submittal requirements. And sometimes those submittal requirements were named different things in different chapters, even though it was referring to roughly the same type of document or the same type of thing that planning staff would need for its review. So we've standardized those for consistency. We've placed the standard notes, certificates, and other items that are common to most applications in the manual, as well as how to prepare a parking, landscaping, or lighting plan. And, for example, our plant list is in there. Now, there are many things on that plant list that I would love to change, but first step is to reorganize the code and sort of give this good bones that we can then layer the rest on. The manual does include flowcharts for all of our application types, and as Mr. Elliott mentioned, by documenting this, we may be identifying things that might want to change. For example, I look at this flowchart and that looks awfully complicated. It almost looks like a parody of a flowchart. And there are perhaps some opportunities for streamlining there. The manual lists for each application type. It's broken down by application type and provides information for each of those applications. And while we're not quite there yet, eventually our goal would be able to just kind of pull a chapter out of that manual and hand it to somebody, and they would know what they needed to do to make that thing happen. And I think this is a great first step. And there is certainly room for improvement in the graphics and even the processes. Another thing I'd like to touch on are the residential zone districts. This is truly the new portion of the code. And one thing I emphasized kind of in previous discussions about this is currently, if you want to do a residential development in Arapahoe County, your only option smaller than an acre is to go through a PUD process, which can be somewhat cumbersome. It can involve a lot of back and forth between the developer, the developer, staff, and the neighbors. And the advantage of having an actual residential zone district is that it sets expectations on all sides. The developer knows what they're getting into. If someone's zoning something to R1D, the neighbors know what to expect. It's not just a PUD that's negotiated ad hoc. These districts were also designed with some of our existing neighborhoods in mind. An example is the neighborhood that's at the southeast corner of Bellevue and Broadway. The vast majority of those lots would fit in the R1D 7,000 square foot lot district. I think there were 4 out of several hundred that didn't actually fit within the minimum lot size for that district. Although I should also emphasize that this is not proposing any map changes, but we wanted to design districts that could serve us in the future and also be helpful to the residents. As an example, R1D allows a 5-foot side yard setback. Currently, that neighborhood requires a 10-foot side yard setback, and we have at least 20 Board of Adjustment cases that were approved reducing side yard setbacks, which should be an alarm bell that perhaps something should be looked at in that area, and we're hoping to do that. These districts do provide some options for developers from single-family detached down to townhome development. And they also allow clusters in some of the zoning districts where somebody could create smaller lots if they preserve a good portion of the site as open space. It does not allow a density bonus at this time, but that's something that we could look at with future amendments if nobody is opting for the cluster option. We wanted to create, as I said, options for developers that do not require PUDs. And the last bullet on the right-hand column, the small lot standards do apply if your lots dip below 5,000 square feet, and those are some enhanced design standards that already exist in our code. The meat of this, at least for for planning, we tend to always be reviewing the setbacks, and as with most zoning, the setbacks scale down as you get to smaller zone districts. One thing I will highlight is there are some zone districts that allow less than 5-foot setback from the property line, and builders will have to be cautious when using that, because then you have to start looking at fire ratings under the building code. But again, it is about options for the builders. The code also includes a number of content changes, which are enumerated in the staff report. I'll highlight a few on this big bullet list. A lot of them were based on consistency, but one content change, administrative site plans. In the current planned unit development chapter that we adopted a few years ago, administrative site plans were required generally for development. And after experience with a project off Uinta Way, as well as just wanting to clarify things, we're saying that administrative site plans are not required for individual 1 or 2 family dwellings. That's just a clarification. You don't need an administrative site plan if you've got a single family lot. You can go build your house. It's fine. And also if you do a minor subdivision, which is 4 lots or less. So if you're just making a small subdivision within an existing neighborhood, an administrative site plan would not be required because the scope of it is so small. Then our experience with the one we had that was, I think, 3 or 4 lots, it ended up duplicating a lot of information that we already saw when we went through previous steps in the process. The code also includes recent updates, such as our bee and chicken regulations, which Mr. Elliott mentioned earlier, the sort of that last column that has the caveats with a given zone district, where you go for detailed information. The bees and chickens are an example of that. The backyard beekeeping is an accessory in most of our residential zoning districts, but if you check the subsection about bees and chickens, there are further rules about how many chickens you're allowed to have and where the where the coop must be located and other dimensional and area standards. We also got rid of the obsolete zoning districts, which were an unusual inclusion in our code and highlighted as part of the assessment several years ago. There are a couple of changes to the permitted use table I also want to talk about, which is under agricultural uses. The code clarifies that the processing of agricultural commodities can be done on an agricultural site. I'll give the example of olive oil. So you grow your olives and you want to press that into your olive oil. You can do sort of the processing and packaging on site for, sort of the raw material. If you wanted to take that olive oil and convert it into lip balm, that would not necessarily be allowed. However, there is an option for use by special review approval. The goal there is to allow people who are farming to do some initial processing of products, and potentially, if they go through a use by special review process, maybe do additional processing on site. But that's something that we would want to have a public hearing about, because we don't want Monsanto's corporate headquarters at the end of a dirt road. The second item are commercial saltwater injection wells. So these oil and gas industry produces a lot of saltwater because the oil is former seabed. So there's saltwater that must be disposed of. It's not allowed to go into municipal wastewater treatment systems. The way that it's disposed of is through deep saltwater injection wells. And for commercial saltwater injection wells, we have rules for them, but it was not very clear in the code. So what the table does is clarifies our current practice, which is that a commercial saltwater injection well will be a use by special review with 1041 components. And then if you go to the additional regulations, footnote, it identifies that as requiring a certificate of designation as well. So those were some of the substantive changes that are proposed in this code reorganization. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we are hopeful to receive a recommendation for approval, and I or Don Elliott or Alan White can answer any questions you have, or we can move on to the public hearing portion of the public hearing.
Question?
I'd just like to make a comment. As a past and current user of these documents, I applaud your reorganization, and I think that the development application manual is a great addition.
I just had one question in going through it. I guess I've learned from dealings with the 4 square mile that in some cases the county advised the developer to go to the homeowners before they even got very far in the process. But when I read the public hearing and notice requirements, table 5-1, you mention HOAs, but sometimes there's not an HOA. And is that an unwritten rule that you sort of sense when the developer should, or should that be written? That's my only question.
That's an excellent question, and it's a very timely question, because earlier this week we had a study session with the Board of County Commissioners to talk about neighborhood meetings and whether they should be required and when they should be required. So we did get the thumbs up from the Board of County Commissioners to draft regulations addressing that very issue, and what that will probably look like is an additional column in that table that talks about neighborhood meetings and which applications could require neighborhood meetings. Generally, we're looking at having anything that involves a rezoning, use by special review, go automatically trigger a neighborhood meeting, and perhaps allowing the planning division manager to require one in other cases. Where these would not be optional. So if the planning division manager, if that's how they get adopted. But to shorter answer to your question is, yes, that's a wonderful addition, and we hope to bring it to you.
Okay, but that makes me feel better, because if nobody comes, that's one thing, but you sure have to give them the option so there are no surprises.
Right, absolutely, and we think it can create better projects and a better process for applicants, because something that Jan mentioned is that sometimes you'll get all the way to the public hearing and a developer will say, well, that's great feedback from the neighborhood, but it's too expensive to make that change now. We've spent a lot of time on this, and if they can start out having that feedback from the neighborhood before the application even comes to Arapahoe County, it has the opportunity, I think, for a better outcome.
Very good. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, actually, I have a question on that note as well. So if you are going to indicate that would be required, are you going to put parameters around that? Because I know what can also happen is people say, well, I didn't hear about that, and they show up at your hearing, they didn't tell me, so on and so forth, or something comes around later in your process, even though you've made that presentation. So I guess if you're going to establish timing and that objective is met, that would carry, I guess, some weight in the process.
Right, and there would be, it'll probably look a lot like a public notice where, at least 10 days prior to the neighborhood meeting, you have to mail letters to property owners within a certain radius, and that radius is probably going to be different in the more urban areas of the county than in the rural areas of the county. And, there may be a sign posting required on the property as well. And, I don't think that'll prevent everybody from...
But I think it's great if you establish the criteria for how that particular notice happens.
Right.
So that there's really mutual responsibility to participate.
Yep.
Jason, can I?
Oh, certainly.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, everything Jason said is accurate. I just want to say this is something a lot of communities are doing for exactly the reason he said. Early notice just heads off a lot of problems. And a lot of people who get very fired up at the end, turns out that now they're fired up partly because they didn't want change and partly because they didn't know about it. And if they knew about it early, a whole lot of that angst goes away. But Once you start asking questions, it raises an enormous number of questions. What kind of notice? Who has to document? Does staff have to be there? Do you have to meet only once? Do you have to meet only with one group? There are just many, many nuances to it that my advice would be, it is not a quick and dirty. This takes a lot of time. Aurora is struggling with this and has been struggling for 3 or 4 years. What is the right things to require a meeting on? What does a meeting mean? What level of information should be brought so the neighbors have a fair chance of knowing something? That doesn't require architectural or engineering expenses, because that defeats the whole purpose of the thing. So my point is that this is a much trickier topic than it sounds like. It takes a good bit of discussion to sort that out. And when it's sorted out, my strong advice in most people is don't put it in the code, put it in the manual. Put the requirement in the code, put all the details in the manual, so that as you learn over time as to what works, what doesn't work, we thought this would make them happy, but they're angry, you can amend it without having to get in and mess with the LDRs. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, just as a side note, I think what happens, because I know Aurora does this, when Aurora did not mandate notice to people in the surrounding area, regardless of how many neighborhoods or miles or whatever, people would show up at their public meetings outraged. And, they would go on until like 1 or 2 in the morning. So this, I think, is helpful in that regard to, number one, let the developer know there is opposition, not to say that won't rear its head again at the public meeting, but it also helps with the community relations aspect and the possibility of making some kind of adjustment to the plan. So you're either going to hear it up front or you're going to hear it at the end. So
better to get it diffused early on. Yep. Very good. I'm glad to hear that it's being considered. Very good. Any other questions? Okay, then I guess we will open the public hearing if anybody wants to come and speak to these recommended reorganization of the Land Development Code and the proposed Development Application Manual. Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the Planning Commission.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Very good.
For conditional recommendation to approve. In the case of LDC 18-004, Reorganized Land Development Code, New Residential Zone Districts, and Development Application Manual, I have reviewed the staff report, including all exhibits and attachments, and have listened to the applicant's presentation and the public comments as presented at the hearings, and hereby move to recommend approval of this application based on the findings in the staff report, subject to condition number 1.
We have a motion made by Mrs. Woolman. Do we have a second to the motion?
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Mrs. Latchett seconds the motion. Any other comments? We will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all for your hard work on organizing.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's looking good.
Yeah.
Great lift.
Snazzy cover.
I'm going to make an announcement about the neighborhood meetings.
Jane beat you to the punch.
Okay. That's the last item on our agenda. Meeting is adjourned.
You don't have to check the books.
I know, I got to keep my tools.
Yeah,
I have a spot on my bookshelf.
Yeah, you see. I can get rid of the old one. So then this.
Yeah, this is actually smaller.
Yeah, than the other one is. Yeah, that's kinder.